Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Ace here, and I'm bringing you guys some more Napoleonic Wars videos. These videos are awesome. They're all made by Epic History TV, and it's just an amazing series. If you guys haven't checked it out, go check it out. Also, I've got a whole playlist with all of my videos on here, so if you want to check that out, go for it too. They are all in order, and we've worked our way through most of the series at this point. There's actually only two videos left in the main series, France 1814, and then the always famous Battle of Waterloo. So I'm super excited to see how this ends for Napoleon. I know a little bit about his end, but I'm always down to learn more. I can't say how great this Epic History TV just experience has been. It's a fantastic channel. If you guys haven't subbed to him, please go do that. And while you're at it, sub to me, ring that bell, because it really does help me out. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Anyway, today's video is going to be France 1814. Napoleon's Endgame. So I'm super excited. I'll sit back, I'll shut up. Let's just get started.
In October 1813, Napoleon had suffered his heaviest ever defeat at Leipzig, the Battle of the Nations. Surviving French forces, exhausted, sick and demoralized, retreated to the River Rhine and prepared to defend France from invasion. But in November, the armies of the Sixth Coalition paused their advance, and Austrian Foreign Minister Metternich offered peace terms. The Frankfurt proposals would allow Napoleon to keep his throne if France returned to her so-called natural frontiers. It was the best offer Napoleon was likely to get, now that his back was to the wall.
That's not a bad
all
offer.
Europe's great powers were united against him. Even so, he did not accept the terms.
I was just about to say, I doubt Napoleon's going to accept it, because he's just, I don't know if he's too prideful, or he just thinks that he's impossible and can't be defeated, or what, but one comment did come in on one of my previous videos that said, towards the end here, you're really going to see Napoleon's might, because there's something special about the way that Napoleon commands his troops versus his marshals commanding him. Yeah, I'm really hoping that these last few battles kind of feel like the early years of Le Grand Armée, you know? But, yeah, I don't know.
He merely agreed to reopen negotiations. To the Allies, and many in France itself, it proved that Napoleon would not listen to reason. The war went on, and by January 1814, Napoleon's situation looked even worse. Many of his besieged garrisons in the east were starved into surrender.
Yeah.
Marshal Davout, with 34,000 men in Hamburg, was now besieged.
Oh, wow.
Denmark, one of France's last allies, was invaded by Bernadotte's Swedish army. And
Marshal Davout, he, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't he in charge of the Third Corps way back in the day, and then eventually it became the First Corps, and he was in charge of the First Corps? I think that's the same Davout. If so, he was a military genius. I mean, he did fantastic work. And specifically, I think it was Davout and, was it Bernadotte, that were supposed to come into battle together when he chose not to. But they may not be the same guys, and it's sometimes a little hard to, get the names straight.
Made to join the coalition. French troops evacuated the Netherlands, which reasserted its independence after nearly 20 years of French control. In Italy, Eugene's army faced a new enemy, Joachim Murat, King of Naples, now marching north with 30,000 men to honor his new alliance with the Sixth Coalition.
Wow.
In Paris, Napoleon responded to the crisis with a series of extreme measures. Property taxes doubled, state salaries and pensions suspended, 300,000 new conscripts called up, from a country already exhausted by 20 years of war.
That's not going to make his people very happy. I could see a coup coming or something like that, you know?
He ordered the release of Pope Pius, under French house arrest for the last 5 years, to try to shore up his support in Italy. He even agreed to release Fernando, the Bourbon King of Spain, to take up his throne in exchange for peace between France and Spain, a condition that Fernando was in no position to honor. But these concessions were too little, far too late. In January, 2 coalition armies crossed the Rhine into France. Blücher's army of Silesia and Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia. Outnumbered French forces in their path could only fall back. On the 25th of January, Napoleon said farewell to his wife and son at the Tuileries Palace, before leaving for the front. He would never see either of them again.
Oh, really?
With just 70,000 men, he faced odds of 4 to 1.
Not to do spoilers, but I know about the end game of Napoleon, and specifically what his punishments were and things like that. And I just, I don't know. I thought, I don't know how to. Most of you guys already know, but I don't want to give it away for those of you that don't. This is the little bit of Napoleon that I do know, and I thought that his family was there with him. You know, so that's interesting. Wow.
Most of his troops were raw conscripts, some without uniforms, many just learning how to hold a musket. But for the first time in years, Napoleon's army was so small that he'd be able to exercise direct command over all its movements.
Oh, wow.
The result would be one of the most audacious and brilliant campaigns in history. Imagine Napoleon
sorry about that, you guys.
Bring this video.
Great game, by the way, if you guys haven't played it, honestly.
The battle for France would be fought east of Paris, mostly across Champagne, a flat region divided by the rivers Marne and Seine and their tributaries. In late January, fields were dusted with snow, and roads quickly turned to mud. Napoleon learned that the coalition armies were widely scattered, with part of Blücher's army near Napoleon's old college at Brienne. The Emperor advanced rapidly, hoping to trap and destroy part of Blücher's army. But after a hard day's fighting that cost both sides 3,000 casualties, Blücher was able to retreat towards Schwarzenberg's army.
It's interesting because these battles aren't going to be nearly as many deaths, I guess, as I'm used to. You know, sometimes the armies were so big just a couple years ago that 40,000 deaths on each side was not unheard of, and now 3,000 a day is what they're talking about. It's just it really shows the smaller size of the armies.
That evening, Napoleon was nearly skewered by a charging Cossack, saved only by General Gorgo's good shooting.
Wow.
As Napoleon tried to work out the enemy's movements, Blücher, heavily reinforced by Schwarzenberg, made a surprise attack at La Rothière. Allied troops advanced through swirling snow to assault the village, defiantly held by young French conscripts. One was so inexperienced that Marshal Marmont had to personally show him how to load his musket during the battle.
Wow.
By late afternoon, Raeder's Bavarian Corps was falling on Napoleon's flank. Heavily outnumbered, Napoleon had no option but to retreat, having lost 5,000 casualties and 73 guns abandoned in the thick mud. The Allies' frontal attacks meant their losses were greater, but by combining their armies...
What about the 6th Corps? Did they get cut off? And they couldn't retreat in time, or are they supposed to be going north? I'm sure they'll let me know about it.
They'd defeated Napoleon on French soil for the first time.
Okay, he is going north.
Believing Napoleon would now retreat towards Paris, the Allies decided to advance along two routes to ease pressure on the roads. Blücher would take a northern route along the Marne. Schwarzenberg would follow the Seine. But dividing their armies again would play right into Napoleon's hands. After 2 days to reorganize, Napoleon continued his retreat to Nogent, where he learned that the Allies had split their armies. Not only that, they were advancing at different speeds. The aggressive Blücher racing ahead, while the more cautious Schwarzenberg lagged behind. Leaving Oudinot and Victor to guard the Seine bridges and delay Schwarzenberg, Napoleon...
I got a question. What is that? Sorry, it's a little blurry, but I think 11th Corps and the reserves down here, are they staying just ahead of the armies to send recon for Napoleon? Or are they actually there to kind of get a few cheeky hits in? I mean, let me know if you guys know down in the comments.
Napoleon raced north through mud and rain with 30,000 men. The army of Silesia was strung out on the march, oblivious to the danger it was in. First, Napoleon fell on General Ossouffief's Russian 9th Corps at Champaubert, destroying it, taking its commander and 2,000 men prisoner. The next morning, he marched on General Osten-Sacken's force near Montmiral. This was a much larger force, with 2 infantry and 1 cavalry corps, and was expecting support from York's Prussian 1st Corps. But the Prussians were late, and Sacken's troops could not withstand the French onslaught. At this desperate hour, the Emperor's elite Old Guard were no longer held back, but were often thrown into the thick of the fighting. By the end of the day, Napoleon had inflicted another 3,500 casualties, twice his own losses, and the Allies were in rapid retreat. Napoleon had ordered Marshal MacDonald to cut off the enemy's escape by seizing the Marne Bridge at Chateau Thierry. But York's Prussians got there first. The next day, Napoleon could only batter their rear guard as the enemy fled across the Marne, destroying the bridge behind them. Sending Marshal Mortier to rebuild the bridge and continue the pursuit, Napoleon doubled back to rejoin Marmont, who had been left to keep watch on Blücher. Napoleon attacked at Vauchamp, using General Grouchy's cavalry to outflank Blücher's army, which was soon in headlong retreat. A merciless French pursuit inflicted 6,000 Prussian and Russian casualties.
Wow.
Napoleon lost just 600 men.
Wow.
Napoleon...
This just shows that even this late in the game, how amazing of a military leader Napoleon is, especially when he can specifically lead his troops, you know, actually be there as a figurehead. I mean, he lost 600 troops compared to 6,000. That's 10%. That's one of his troops for every 10 enemy troops. That's incredible.
Had taken on an enemy army almost twice his size and beaten it 4 times in just 6 days.
Jesus.
Blücher had lost an estimated 15,000 casualties in battle, and another 15,000 in smaller engagements, as stragglers or deserters.
Wow.
For now, the army of Silesia had been scattered and neutralized. But in the south, Marshals Victor and Oudinot had not been able to prevent Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia from crossing the Seine in 3 places. Austrian troops were now just 40 miles from Paris. Leaving Mortier and Marmont to keep watch on Blücher, Napoleon raced south. Schwarzenberg, alarmed by news of Blücher's defeat...
All he's got is 11th Corps, 2nd Corps, and 7th Corps, and then his young guard. It just, it doesn't seem like he's got much, you know? To face... I mean, it just doesn't seem like he's got much.
And of Napoleon's approach, immediately ordered a retreat. It was too late for Wittgenstein's advance guard, routed at Mormant with 2,000 casualties. Napoleon sent Victor's Second Corps to seize the bridge at Montereau, but was so infuriated by its slow progress that he sacked Victor and gave his corps to General Gérard.
Oh, wow.
The next day, at the Battle of Montereau, the French drove the Allied Württemberg Corps back across the river, with 30% losses. According to some accounts, the Emperor sighted the French cannon himself, as he had at Lodi 18 years before. Napoleon had the...
Let's be real, how cool would that be? To be artillery on the battlefront for France, and you're getting ready to shoot some cannons, and Napoleon comes up and says, hey, yeah, I want to help with this one. I want to light it, something like that, you know? It's an honor. I mean, could you imagine? Jesus.
Allies on the run. But how long could it last? Even as fighting continued, negotiations between France and the coalition reopened at Châtillon-sur-Seine on the 5th of February. The Allied terms were now more severe. A return to France's frontiers of 1791, which meant the additional loss of Belgium, a humiliation that Napoleon refused to accept. Instead,
What's interesting is, why would they assume that Napoleon would accept that? He just, I wouldn't say won, but I mean, yeah, he won several battles. He was able to push back. You know, they may be in France still, but he's doing pretty damn good. I would, if anything, I would give him the same deal again, possibly. I wouldn't have taken more from him.
He tried to revive the Frankfurt proposals, hoping to play for time and to split the coalition, whose war aims varied from Britain's hard line to Austria's more ambiguous position. But this hope was thwarted by British Foreign Secretary Lord Castlereagh. On the 1st of March, he persuaded the Allies to sign the Treaty of Shuml. In it, Russia, Prussia, Austria and Great Britain agreed to keep 150,000 troops in the field and not to negotiate separately with France, while Britain added the sweetener of a £5 million subsidy to be shared among the Allies. The treaty's secret articles specified common war aims, including the future independence of the German states, Switzerland and Italy, while Spain was to be returned to the Bourbons and Holland to the House of Orange.
So that was how Germany, I guess, the German states later on became Germany. Yeah, let me know if you guys know in the comments.
The four powers even agreed that once they'd defeated Napoleon, they'd form a 20-year defensive alliance to maintain peace in Europe, a sign of their newfound commitment to each other. A split in the coalition had been Napoleon's last best hope for a favourable peace. That was gone. And news from across the country was bleak. French cities were surrendering to the Allies without a fight.
Wow.
Nancy, Dijon and Mâcon had all fallen. In the south, Wellington defeated Marshal Soult at Orthez.
Oh, really?
Forcing him to fall back on Toulouse.
Oh, but he didn't kill him.
2 weeks later, as British troops approached the city of Bordeaux, it declared loyalty to France's Bourbon kings. The mayor himself rode out to greet the British, bearing a white cockade, the sign of Bourbon allegiance.
Oh, wow.
Napoleon's hope for a nation in arms to resist the Allies had not materialized. Allied troops, particularly Cossacks, often robbed French civilians and committed some atrocities. French peasants took revenge when they could, but there was no guerrilla war to mirror what French troops had encountered in Spain or Russia. The chief desire among ordinary French people was for peace, at almost any price.
Wow.
Any talk of Napoleon's defeat in late February was premature. The French Emperor was driving Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia before him, even though it was twice his size.
Wow.
But Schwarzenberg scrambled to safety behind the River Aube. Napoleon knew he had to land another decisive blow soon, so turned his attention back to Blücher. After an aborted attempt to join forces with Schwarzenberg, Blücher had decided to resume his advance on Paris, gathering reinforcements en route, and with only Marmont and Mortier's weak corps to oppose him. Leaving Marshal MacDonald in command in the south, Napoleon set off to intercept Blücher, covering 60 miles in 3 days along terrible roads choked with mud. At Napoleon's approach, Blücher retreated across the Marne, burning the bridges behind him. 24 hours later, they'd been rebuilt by French engineers, and Napoleon was poised to crush Blücher against the Aisne River, because the major crossing point at Soissons was held by a Franco-Polish garrison. But after just a day's fighting, the garrison commander at Soissons tamely surrendered, allowing Blücher to escape.
Wow.
Napoleon continued his pursuit across the Aisne, still hoping to cut off the army of Silesia. But at Craon, he encountered Russian troops in a strong defensive position. The Russians fought stubbornly. The French finally forced the enemy to withdraw, but only at the cost of 6,000 casualties, including many irreplaceable veterans from Napoleon's guard.
I believe that.
Napoleon.
And the struggle too is he had so many young soldiers. So I mean, the more older, advanced, old guard people like that, just veteran soldiers in your corps that you lose, the less experience you have, and it just makes it tougher and tougher.
And pushed on to Laon. But by now, Blücher had concentrated his forces, 98,000 troops in all, and outnumbered Napoleon 2 to 1. French attacks were repulsed, while Marmont's corps was caught off guard by a late Allied counterattack and routed. Napoleon was lucky to avoid a much heavier defeat. Blücher, usually aggressive to the point of recklessness, was unwell and had been told Napoleon's army was twice as big as it was, leading him to act with unusual caution. Laon was a heavy blow to Napoleon. 6,500 casualties he could not afford.
Wow.
Undaunted, he fell back to Soissons, and after a brief moment to reorganize, he marched on the city of Reims, which had just fallen to Saint-Priest's Russian corps.
I guess that makes sense. If you can take that, you can kind of hold this water line very well, However, he still has troops down here to deal with, right? The King of Bavaria or something? Schwarzenberg, I think his name was. Isn't he down in the southeast? So, I mean, if you're not careful, you're going to get pinched, I'm sure he knows what he's doing, though. I mean, again, he's a military strategist, military genius, in my opinion.
In a whirlwind assault, Napoleon retook the city. Saint-Priest himself was mortally wounded, his corps routed. Meanwhile, in the south, Schwarzenberg had resumed his offensive as soon as he found out Napoleon had gone north. In heavy fighting, he'd driven Oudinot and MacDonald back from the River Aube,
Oh, I forgot about McDonald.
5 days later, the Allies had recaptured Troyes, as MacDonald retreated behind the River Seine.
Wow.
Now, after 4 days to rest and reorganize his battered army, Napoleon was coming south once more. Schwarzenberg.
You know, it seems like a damn shame that he can't rely on his marshals at this point and his troops. I mean, MacDonald couldn't even hold. I understand they were probably a bigger army, but you have Napoleon down here with the same troops, and he's able to push them back. You know, it just it shows the level of experience and just how much of a difference it made to have the emperor on the battlefield.
Schwarzenberg, emboldened by news of Napoleon's defeat at Laon, decided that this time he would stand and fight. Napoleon advanced on Arcis-sur-Aube, ignoring reports that the enemy was not retreating as he believed, but gathering for battle. As heavy fighting broke out, Napoleon still believed he faced only the enemy rearguard. It was a nasty surprise to discover that he faced the entire might of the army of Bohemia. 28,000 men against 80,000. In desperate fighting, Napoleon personally rallied fleeing troops and exposed himself to enemy fire, having his horse killed under him by an exploding shell. But the odds were too great. At the end of the second day, Napoleon was forced to order the retreat.
I like that quote.
Napoleon believed his army was now too weak to take on the Allies directly.
Yeah.
So he decided to change strategy. He would march into the rear of the Allied armies, join up with some of his isolated garrisons, and cut the enemy's lines of communication, forcing them to abandon their advance on Paris.
I like that. It's a smart move. It's kind of a last ditch, though.
But the Allies, until now always one step behind Napoleon, had just received crucial information. Talleyrand, the most brilliant French diplomat of the age, and the most slippery. He'd served France's monarchy, the Revolution, then Napoleon, until in 1807 he fell out irrevocably with the Emperor over foreign policy.
Really?
He now believed that Napoleon was dragging France into ruin, and worked behind the scenes to ensure his downfall. From Paris, he wrote to the Russian Emperor Alexander at Allied headquarters, informing him that in the capital, support for Napoleon was crumbling, and the city's defences had been completely neglected. He urged the Allies to march immediately on Paris, without allowing Napoleon to distract them.
Wow.
Talleyrand's information was confirmed when the Allies intercepted a report from Napoleon's chief of police, General Savary, meant for the Emperor. The treasury, arsenals and powder stores are empty. We are completely at the end of our resources. The population is discouraged and discontented, wishing peace at any price. As Napoleon advanced on Saint-Dizier.
So basically, he was just a big traitor to his country. I guess, actually, you can't even call him a traitor to his country in a sense. You could probably argue that he wasn't, because it sounds like he was looking out for what he thought was best for his country. I guess you would just call him a traitor to Napoleon. But Napoleon's the Emperor of France, so it's kind of that, you know, was he a traitor, was he not a traitor? At the end of the day, it seems like he was looking out for what he thought was best for France, but still kind of slippery and, you know, sleazy in my opinion.
The Allies sent General Witzengerode and 10,000 cavalry to harass his army and to screen their own movements.
Okay.
Then began their march on Paris.
Wow.
At Fère Champenoise, they collided with Marmont and Mortier's corps, advancing to join Napoleon. An entire National Guard division, 5,000 men, was virtually wiped out as the marshals suffered a crushing defeat.
What happened to Marshal
Napoleon
Marmont?
feared that the fall of Paris would be a fatal blow to his regime. His political authority and ability to wage war might not recover. So, when he received news of the Allies' movements, he tore up his plans and ordered a forced march back to Paris, intending to lead its defense in person.
There's no way he can beat him back there.
Napoleon's wife and son were evacuated from the capital, along with most of his ministers. His brother, Joseph, the ex-king of Spain, was in charge of the city's defenses, but had done little. Paris was awash with rumors of...
I know you guys have said Joseph, his brother, wasn't a military man, but Jesus Christ, dude, it seems like everywhere that this man is put, he just does a crappy job. You know, you'd think that he'd have a little bit more training being the brother of Napoleon. Instead, it just seems like he's riding on the fame of his brother. It's just, it seems pitiful to me.
Of treachery and defeat. Marmont and Mortier were able to reach Paris before the Allies, adding their troops to the garrison. It now totaled 37,000 men, including some hardened veterans of the Guard, but many more young conscripts, while a third were part-time soldiers of the National Guard. The Allies had 120,000 seasoned troops outside the city, and given the urgency of taking Paris before Napoleon could intervene, their elite guards and grenadier divisions would lead the way. On the 30th of March, they began their assault from the north. Heavy fighting raged throughout the day.
Wow.
The city's defenders fought bravely, inflicting several thousand casualties on the advancing enemy. But defeat was inevitable.
Yeah. Like I said, there's no way Napoleon can...
To save Paris from destruction, Marshal Marmont agreed to surrender the city, on condition the garrison was permitted to leave with its weapons.
Wow, what a bold move.
At the Hôtel des Invalides, the 71-year-old Marshal Serrurier oversaw the burning of 1,400 flags and standards captured from France's enemies, as well as Frederick the Great's sword and sash, so they would not fall into Allied hands. Napoleon was just 15 miles from Paris when he was informed of the city's surrender.
Wow.
He sat with his head in his hands for 15 minutes.
I mean, that had to be a crushing blow. I can only imagine, you know, there's a war going on and they push through in the U.S. and take D.C. or you know, I mean, it's like that in every country. It's your big city, you know. Imagine like if they took New York in the U.S. It's just, I couldn't believe it. I don't know how I would feel. It just had to be a crushing blow for him, you know. Wow.
On the 31st of March 1814, France's enemies marched into Paris for the first time since the 100 Years' War. Parisian crowds cheered the three Allied monarchs, bringers of peace. Everyone in Paris was suddenly a royalist once more. Above all, they cheered for Emperor Alexander of Russia, now hailed as Europe's savior.
Really? I guess that makes sense.
Don Cossacks bivouacked on the Champs-Élysées. Allied troops generally behaved well. "35 miles away, Napoleon was at Fontainebleau with 36,000 men, all of them hungry and exhausted after their 100-mile forced march. Nevertheless, Napoleon began planning an immediate advance on Paris.
Wow. He
But
just
for the
never
first
gives up.
time, he faced unanimous opposition from his ministers and marshals, including Ney, MacDonald, Oudinot, and Berthier.
Wow.
They reminded him of his oath to act for the good of France. He accused them of disloyalty, acting only to save themselves. They told him the war was lost, and he must abdicate in favour of his son if possible. On the 4th of April, Marshal Marmont surrendered his entire corps to the coalition,
Wow.
which was marched over to the enemy lines against the wishes of many of its officers and men. This was a devastating blow to Napoleon, and encouraged the Allies to reject his offer of a conditional abdication in favour of his son. 2 days later, he abdicated without conditions. The Allied powers having proclaimed that the Emperor Napoleon is the only obstacle to the re-establishment of peace in Europe, the Emperor Napoleon, faithful to his oath, declares that he renounces for himself and his heirs the thrones of France and Italy, and that there is no personal sacrifice, including his life, that he is not ready to make in the interests of France.
Yeah, talk about unconditional. Oh my God. So he had no idea what they were going to do with him. That has to be terrifying.
Napoleon's abdication was formalized by the Treaty of Fontainebleau, by which he was allowed to keep the title of emperor, become sovereign of the small island of Elba, and retain a bodyguard of 400 men. News came too late to prevent Wellington's attack on Toulouse, leading to a costly and pointless battle, with more than 7,000 casualties. The night after his abdication, Napoleon tried to commit suicide, using the poison that had been made for him in Russia in case of capture.
I was going to ask about that.
But it had lost its potency, and he survived. 2 weeks later, Napoleon bade farewell to his old guard at Fontainebleau Palace, and began his journey into exile.
Wow.
The Napoleonic Wars, which had raged on land and sea for 11 years, seemed finally at an end.
Yeah.
The death toll is unknown, but historians estimate that 2 to 3 million lives were lost across Europe. Most soldiers died not in battle, but from disease.
I believe
Many
that.
thousands were left maimed and disfigured. For most of this period, Napoleon was master of Europe, imposing treaties on humbled enemies, redrawing frontiers, overthrowing old regimes, and making new kings. He was the last figure in history to combine total political power with frontline military genius, in the mold of Alexander and Caesar. But it seemed Napoleon's reign was to end in abject military defeat. However, exile on Elba did not prove to Napoleon's taste. In less than 10 months, he would return to France to fight one last great campaign to reclaim his throne.
Wow. All right, you guys, let's have a talk about that. Yeah, I mean, he just kept pushing and pushing, and you got to know when to call it quits, you know? I mean, for the good of your country. I mean, he even argued against his marshals and his officers, and just, it's, at a certain point, it's too much. He wouldn't give up, and I respect that, but you have to also know when to give up, when to give in, when it's just not worth it. One of the things that really surprised me in this video, though, is when he was sent off to Elba for exile, I thought I know he's in exile, but I thought his family lived out the rest of his life there with him. But turns out they didn't. I guess that was the last time that he ever saw him. Was when they mentioned in this video. So it's yeah. I don't know. Before I end this video, there's only one more episode in the main series, and then I'm gonna jump straight into the Marshall series, and then from there we're gonna get into something else. I'll talk to you more about it in the next video. I'm still kind of deciding, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. Till next time, this is Ace High. I love y'all, and I'm out.